Imagine a world where you have like absolute 100% freedom of speech. I mean, the Constitution is completely intact.
Right.
There are no secret police, no book burnings. You can stand in the public square or, the digital equivalent of it and just shout your opinions at the absolute top of your lungs.
Yeah.
But an invisible, incredibly complex mathematical architecture basically guarantees that not a single human being will ever hear what you say.
Wow.
It's not censorship as a brick wall, it's censorship as a vacuum. You speak and your words just, well, they enter a void.
That is a terrifying way to frame it.
Right. So today we are tearing into a scenario that calls this exact thing controlled visibility. And honestly, the really terrifying part, this isn't some dystopian sci-fi pitch.
No, not at all.
It is a rigorously modeled trajectory of our current technological economy, and we're pulling this from a deep dive into a framework called Objective 1.0. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Yeah, it fundamentally redefines what control looks like in a society,
Huh.
We are so conditioned by history to look for the authoritarian dictator.
The bad guy in the suit.
Right, the shadowy cabal in a smoke-filled room,
Mhm.
drafting some master plan to subjugate the masses.
Yeah.
But the core premise of the Objective 1.0 scenario is that you really don't need a dictator if you have the right algorithms and the right market incentives.
Okay, wow.
The architecture of control is entirely emergent.
Wait, let me stop you right there. Emergent. Because that sounds like a very polite academic way of saying it just happens.
Huh.
But when we are talking about massive tech monopolies, AI systems that influence elections, and like wealth inequality that rivals the Gilded Age, it feels incredibly intentional to me.
I get that.
It feels like there are specific CEOs making specific choices to corner the market. So are we just sort of letting them off the hook by calling it emergent?
Oh, we aren't letting them off the hook at all, but we are trying to diagnose the actual disease rather than just yelling at the symptoms.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Think about the concept of a rational actor in game theory. Every single entity in the system is just making the next logical, mathematically sound decision to survive and grow.
Right.
I mean, a corporation's fiduciary duty is literally to maximize shareholder value.
Yeah.
To do that, they have to increase efficiency, which today means adopting AI.
Obviously.
To make the AI better, they need more data.
Yeah.
To get more data, they need to keep users on their platform longer.
And to keep them there, they optimize for engagement.
Exactly. Which often means optimizing for outrage or tribalism. No one in that chain woke up and said, I want to destroy shared objective reality today.
Yeah, they just said, we need to boost our fourth quarter user retention metrics by 2%.
Exactly.
So it's basically death by a billion rational microdecisions.
I was actually thinking about the old Monopoly board game analogy earlier.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Right. Usually we think of monopolies as these super aggressive, rule-breaking entities. But in the actual game of Monopoly, nobody starts out trying to be evil. You just roll the dice.
Just playing the game. Yeah, you land on a property, you buy it because the rules incentivize you to do so. But slowly, inevitably, the math of the game means one player ends up owning the board, the bank, and the dice.
Right.
But applying this to the modern data economy feels like it needs a bit of an update. It's not just a game of Monopoly anymore. It's a game of Monopoly where every time you land on my property, I don't just take your money, I download a copy of your brain.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So the next time you roll the dice, I already know exactly where you're going to land, and I've dynamically adjusted the rent based on your heart rate and your bank balance.
That is a phenomenal update to the analogy. I mean, it cuts straight to the heart of why the Objective 1.5 framework argues that this era is mathematically different from any previous era of industrial concentration.
How so?
Well, in the past, if you had a monopoly on steel, you just had a lot of steel.
Right, you could set the price.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But having a monopoly on behavioral data is recursive. It allows you to predict and shape future behavior. It's a predictive modeling engine.
So you aren't just capturing the current market.
No, you are actively manufacturing the future market.
Okay, so if there's no evil genius pulling the strings, and this is all just a runaway train of game theory and data accumulation, how does this actually start?
Right.
Because if we look out the window right now, we can totally see this happening.
Right.
What is the engine of this trajectory?
So the framework isolates 5 specific mechanisms. Let's look at the first 2, because they are effectively the twin cylinders powering the entire machine. That's economic concentration and technological centralization.
Okay.
And they're entirely inseparable now.
Let me push back on that for a second, though. We've always had economic concentration, right? Like the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, the East India Trading Company.
Sure.
What makes this technological centralization fundamentally different from some guy owning all the railroads in 1890?
The difference is the scale of the barrier to entry, specifically regarding artificial intelligence and the sheer volume of data required to train it. Let's look at the actual architecture of modern AI. We aren't talking about a clever string of code that a college kid can write in a garage anymore.
No, those days are long gone.
Right. The models that are redefining cognitive labor, the large language models, the generative AI, they're built on neural networks with hundreds of billions, sometimes trillions of parameters.
Right, and training those models isn't just about having smart engineers on staff. It requires physical hardware.
A lot of it.
Massive server farms filled with tens of thousands of specialized GPUs that cost, what, tens of thousands of dollars each?
Precisely. And it requires immense amounts of electricity. I mean, a single training run for a frontier AI model can cost hundreds of millions of dollars in compute power alone.
That's insane.
And that's before you even factor in the human capital.
Right.
But the hardware isn't even the ultimate bottleneck. The ultimate bottleneck is the data flywheel.
Okay, the data flywheel, let's unpack this, break that down for us, because I think this is where the nobody can catch up math really sets in.
Yeah, so imagine you want to build a search engine today to compete with the dominant player.
Okay, good luck to me.
Right. But say you can buy the servers. You can hire the engineers. You can even scrape the entire public internet to build your initial index.
So I have a functioning search engine.
You do. But the dominant player doesn't just have the public internet. They have 2 decades of proprietary behavioral data.
Oh, right.
They have trillions of subtle interactions. They know how long someone hovered their mouse over a specific link, what typo they made before clicking the third result, how their search queries change depending on their geographic location and the time of day.
So they aren't just searching text at all, they are mapping human intent.
Yes, they possess an incredibly high-fidelity map of global human psychology. So when they feed that proprietary data into their AI is objectively better.
Because it knows us better than we know ourselves.
Exactly. Because their AI is better, their product is more useful. Because the product is more useful, they attract more users.
And those new users
Generate even more proprietary data, which feeds right back into the model. This is the flywheel. It creates a network effect that is so powerful, the barrier to entry isn't just high, it is mathematically insurmountable for a new entrant.
Wow.
The framework points out that this locks in economic advantage at the very top. If you own the foundational technological infrastructure, you effectively dictate the terms of the entire digital economy.
That makes total sense, but it also sounds kind of, I don't know, fine.
Fine.
Like, as a consumer, I want the best search engine. I want the AI that understands my intent perfectly. I buy from the massive mega retailer because the package arrives at my door in 12 hours.
Right, it's convenient.
Very convenient. And I use the dominant messaging app because that is where my family is. My choices are entirely rational. Why is it a problem if a few companies provide incredibly efficient services?
Well, because of the third mechanism, algorithmic influence.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
This is where the efficiency starts to curdle into something manipulative. We just established that these centralized entities need massive amounts of data to maintain their monopolies.
Yes, the flywheel.
How do you get continuous high-volume data from billions of humans?
Yeah.
You have to keep them engaged. You have to keep them staring at the glass.
And here is where we get into the dark arts of the attention economy. But again, to play devil's advocate here for a second, algorithms just show us what we want to see.
Do they?
I mean, if I like watching videos of people restoring old furniture, the algorithm gives me more of that. It's just a digital butler, isn't it?
That is the marketing narrative. The structural reality is much darker. The algorithm doesn't care what you want in a conscious, aspirational sense. It cares what you cannot look away from.
Oh, that's a huge difference.
Massive. Machine learning models test millions of variables in real time, essentially mapping our cognitive vulnerabilities. They run continuous A/B tests on human psychology. And what they have universally discovered is that the human amygdala, the part of our brain responsible for fear, anger, and tribal threat response, is far more reactive than our prefrontal cortex.
So anger is literally more profitable than joy. Outrage holds attention longer than nuance.
Exactly. And the Objective 1 theory framework notes that these algorithms naturally amplify bias and division, because division is highly stimulating.
Wow.
But it goes deeper than just showing you angry political posts. The framework explicitly states that certain populations become more susceptible to manipulation due to systemic asymmetries.
Okay, what does that actually mean in plain English? Systemic asymmetries.
It means the algorithm knows your specific vulnerabilities.
Oh boy.
Yeah. If the system's predictive model determines that you are currently experiencing financial anxiety, maybe it noticed you started searching for cheaper grocery options.
Or your GPS shows you visiting payday lenders.
Right, or your heart rate data from your smartwatch spikes when you check your banking app. You can tailor narratives specifically to that insecurity.
That is so invasive.
It is. It can serve you targeted content that blames a specific political group for your financial woes, keeping you highly engaged in a state of agitated scrolling. It curates a bespoke reality designed purely to maximize your behavioral surplus.
That is deeply unsettling when you frame it that way. It's not a broadcast, it's a personalized psychological operation to keep the data flywheel spinning,
Fantastic.
which naturally leads us to the fourth mechanism of this trajectory, surveillance expansion. Now, I have a bone to pick with how we usually talk about surveillance.
Go for it.
We act like it's 1984, like Big Brother forced a camera into our living room, but that's not what happened at all. We bought the cameras ourselves, we paid a premium for them, and we pay a monthly subscription to keep them running.
The normalization of ubiquitous monitoring is one of the most critical sociological shifts of the last 20 years. The framework points out that technologies introduced purely for safety, convenience, or efficiency silently expand into massive monitoring infrastructures.
Right?
Let's look at the smart thermostat or the voice-activated assistant in your kitchen.
Yeah, I bought the assistant so I could set a timer for my pasta while my hands are covered in flour. It was purely a convenience play.
Of course it was. But the business model of the hardware is often a loss leader.
Meaning they sell it cheap on purpose.
Right, they sell you the device cheaply because the true value is establishing a permanent data collection node in the most intimate spaces of your life.
In my kitchen.
Yes, the microphone that listens for the pasta timer is also mapping the acoustics of your home, noting when you are awake, when you argue with your spouse, what television shows are playing in the background.
Oh my gosh.
And your car's telematics system isn't just offering GPS navigation. It is recording your acceleration patterns, your braking habits, the exact weight of the person sitting in the passenger seat, and transmitting that back to data brokers.
But, most people say, well, I have nothing to hide. Let them know how I drive or when I make pasta. It doesn't affect me.
I hear that all the time. But the framework highlights a profound psychological toll to this architecture, even if you think you have nothing to hide. It's called the panopticon effect.
The whole prison design, right? Where the guard tower is in the center and the prisoners never know if the guard is looking at them specifically.
Exactly, so they have to assume they're always being watched.
Yeah.
When a population knows, even subconsciously, that every digital interaction, every physical movement, every heartbeat is logged, categorized, and potentially used to evaluate their creditworthiness, their employability, or their insurance premiums, it fundamentally alters human behavior.
So it changed how we act just in case.
Yes. The framework warns that this erosion of privacy induces a subtle chilling effect. It influences expression and reduces our perceived sense of autonomy. You become less likely to explore controversial ideas, less likely to deviate from the statistical norm, because the system rewards compliance and penalizes anomalies.
You essentially auto-regulate your own behavior to avoid triggering an algorithmic penalty. You put yourself in a soft cage.
A soft cage, exactly.
And that brings us to the fifth and final engine that locks this whole thing into place: policy and regulatory capture.
Right.
Because if this is all so damaging, why aren't the politicians stepping in to stop it?
Because the rules of the game are ultimately drafted by the winners. This is the natural endpoint of the first four mechanisms.
Okay.
When a few entities consolidate the wealth of the economy, control the foundational technological infrastructure, possess vast surveillance networks, and run algorithms that dictate the political reality of the voting public, they inevitably gain disproportionate influence over the political process itself.
So it's not just traditional lobbying. It's not just handing a politician a campaign check.
It is much more structural than that. The technological complexity of these systems acts as a shield. The average legislator does not understand the mathematical underpinnings of an LLM or the nuances of programmatic ad bidding.
Definitely not.
So when public outcry demands regulation, say a new law to protect data privacy, who does the government rely on to help draft the legislation? The experts.
And where do the experts work?
For the massive tech monopolies.
Exactly.
So the regulatory frameworks end up reflecting the interests of the economically dominant groups. They draft incredibly complex compliance requirements that the massive monopolies can easily afford to implement.
Because they have armies of lawyers and engineers.
Right, but which serve as fatal barriers to entry for any new startup trying to compete.
Wow.
The regulation meant to curtail the monopoly actually solidifies it. The institutional checks and balances weaken, and the system becomes self-perpetuating.
Okay, so we have the five engines. Economic concentration and technological centralization build the monopoly. Algorithmic influence and surveillance expansion extract the data and control the population.
Right.
And policy capture ensures no one can legally dismantle the machine. But how does a society actually fall into this trap? It doesn't happen overnight. It's not like we all woke up on a Tuesday and agreed to live in a techno-feudal state.
No. It happens in stages. And the Objective 130 framework provides a very clear, chillingly logical, seven-phase timeline for how this progression unfolds. It maps the transition from a dynamic, competitive market to a rigid, stratified society.
Let's walk through these phases, and I really want to ground this because it can sound very abstract. Let's trace this through the experience of a hypothetical average person. Let's call him David.
Okay, David.
David owns a local hardware store. How does David experience this seven-phase progression? Phase one is consolidation, and phase two is dependency. I look at these as the honeymoon period.
The honeymoon is an apt description because initially, this progression feels incredible for the consumer.
Oh, absolutely.
In phase one, consolidation, technological platforms leverage massive amounts of venture capital to offer services at a steep loss. Their goal isn't to make a profit. Their goal is to aggressively consolidate the market and acquire users.
So for David, the hardware store owner, phase one looks like magic. A massive e-commerce platform launches. They offer 2-day shipping for free. They sell power tools cheaper than David can even buy them wholesale from the manufacturer. David's customers love it. David himself starts using the platform to buy office supplies for his store because it's just so cheap and frictionless.
Exactly. The platform is subsidizing the cost of reality to build a habit. And that rapid consolidation leads inevitably to phase two, dependency.
The trap closes.
Because the platform service is so frictionless, and because the prices are artificially low, the traditional alternatives begin to wither and die. The local suppliers go out of business. The regional distribution networks collapse.
The switching costs become too high.
Exactly. The switching costs shift from being a minor inconvenience to an existential threat. For our hypothetical David, phase two is when he realizes that foot traffic to his store has plummeted by 80%.
Oh, wow.
To survive, he realizes he must list his hardware inventory on the massive e-commerce platform. At first, it seems okay. He reaches a global audience. But he's no longer an independent business owner. He is a dependent node in their ecosystem.
He has literally handed over the relationship with his customers to the platform. He's essentially a sharecropper on their digital land.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Which brings us to the end of the honeymoon. Phase 3 is compression, and phase 4 is influence. I call this the squeeze and the spin.
In phase 3, compression, the platforms shift their priorities. They have achieved dominance, they've locked in the dependency, the venture capital subsidies end, and the mandate shifts to aggressive profit extraction.
And people start feeling the pain.
Yes. For the majority of the population, this manifests as intense economic pressure. The framework cites rising costs, wage stagnation, and job displacement.
So for David, the platform suddenly changes its terms of service. They increase the percentage they take from every hammer he sells.
Right.
They start charging him exorbitant fees just to appear in the search results when a customer searches for hammer. They use the data they gathered from his sales to manufacture their own generic brand of hammers and place them above his in the search results.
It's ruthless.
His profit margins are compressed to near zero. He's working twice as hard just to pay rent to the platform.
And it's not just small business owners. Cognitive labor is being compressed by the AI mechanisms we discussed earlier.
Right.
Middle management, legal analysis, basic coding, copywriting, these roles are automated or devalued. The wealth accelerates toward the owners of the compute and the data, while the middle and upper middle classes experience a severe reduction in upward mobility.
But historically, when you squeeze the middle class this hard, things break.
They do.
When people can't feed their families or when they see their life's work evaporated by a rent-seeking monopoly, they organize, they strike, they vote for radical change, sometimes they riot. Why doesn't that happen here? Why does society just accept the compression?
Because of phase 4, influence. The spin. This is where the algorithmic mechanisms are deployed to manage the social fallout of the economic compression.
Oh, okay.
The framework notes that the information ecosystem is weaponized to affect perception, discourse, and decision-making.
So you distract them.
You don't just distract them, you actively redirect their grievances. The predictive models realize that David is experiencing severe economic anxiety. His business is failing. He is a prime target for mobilization.
So he might join a protest.
Right. But before David can organize with other small business owners to demand antitrust legislation against the e-commerce giant, the algorithm intervenes. It floods David's social media feed with hyper-targeted, emotionally inflammatory content.
Oh, man. It shows him videos of cultural wedge issues. It
Yeah.
tells him his town is changing because of some marginalized group or some foreign nation or some rival political party.
Yes. It provides a highly stimulating, visceral scapegoat for his structural pain.
That is so insidious.
The population is kept in a state of perpetual, fragmented conflict. They are fighting each other in the digital town square over highly curated cultural grievances, completely oblivious to the invisible architecture that is extracting their wealth and compressing their future.
Wow.
The algorithmic influence absorbs the kinetic energy of social unrest and dissipates it into harmless digital noise.
That is incredibly bleak. It's like installing shock absorbers on a bulldozer so the driver doesn't feel the bumps as they run over your house.
That's a very vivid way to put it, but yes.
And that distraction allows the system to finalize its control, moving into phase 5, reinforcement, and phase 6, stratification. The concrete hardens.
Phase 5 is the creation of an unbreakable feedback loop. Every time David clicks on an outrage-inducing video, he generates data.
Which makes the algorithm smarter.
Right. That data is used to refine the algorithm, making it even better at distracting him. The engagement generates ad revenue, which concentrates more wealth at the top, which buys more political capture, which prevents the government from intervening.
It's like a closed loop.
Wealth, data, and influence reinforce the position of the dominant actors in a closed loop.
And once that loop is completely sealed, we reach phase 6, stratification. And I want to read a line from the framework notes here because it is terrifying in its clinical detachment.
Go ahead.
He says, society stabilizes into distinct tiers with limited mobility between them. Stabilizes.
It is the death of the American dream, formalized as an economic baseline. The turbulence of the earlier phases subsides because the structure is now rigid. We move into a form of neo-feudalism.
Yeah, feudalism, wow.
Upward mobility ceases to be a statistical reality.
Yeah.
You are born into a tier based on your family's proximity to technological capital. If you don't own the AI, the servers, or the proprietary data streams, you are permanently relegated to the service class.
So education doesn't even matter anymore.
Educational attainment or hard work no longer bridge the gap because the structural barriers, the mathematical impossibilities of competing with the data monopolies are absolute.
You were just a peasant tending the server farms.
Pretty much.
Which finally brings us to the end game, the absolute culmination of the objective 1/3 trajectory. Phase 7, soft constraint. And we touched on this at the very beginning of the deep dive, but we really need to linger here because it completely upends our understanding of freedom.
It is the most insidious phase because it does not look like tyranny. It looks like convenience. In Phase 7, we do not lose our formal legal rights. The Constitution is not suspended. There are no armed guards at the checkpoints. Instead, practical limitations emerge. You are managed entirely by the environment.
The illusion of freedom. You used a phrase earlier, freedom of speech versus freedom of reach. Walk me through exactly how controlled visibility enforces this soft constraint.
Let's go back to our hardware store owner, David.
Okay, David is back.
Let's say David finally wakes up. He realizes the algorithm has been manipulating him. He understands the structural compression.
Good for David.
Right. He decides to run for local office on a platform of breaking up the local telecom and data monopolies. He has total freedom of speech. He can build a website. He can record campaign videos. He can post his manifesto on every social media platform.
But the platforms control the visibility.
Exactly. The algorithm flags his content as friction-inducing or misaligned with the platform's engagement metrics. He is not banned.
Because banning him makes him a martyr.
Yes, banning him would create a martyr. Banning him violates the illusion of free speech. Instead, the algorithm simply dynamically isolates his digital footprint.
Oh, wow.
His posts appear on his own feed, so he thinks he is broadcasting to the world, but his content is de-indexed from the recommendation engines. It is pushed to the very bottom of the search results. His visibility is algorithmically throttled to zero,
He is screaming in a soundproof room, and the walls are made of code.
and it extends far beyond speech. Soft constraint dictates your physical and economic reality.
How so?
Let's say your smart car's insurance premium is dynamically adjusted in real time based on your driving habits.
Okay.
The system determines that you are attending a political rally that the algorithm categorizes as high risk.
Okay.
Your insurance premium quadruples for that day. You're perfectly free to attend the rally. There is no law stopping you,
Right.
but you simply cannot avoid the algorithmic penalty.
The system nudges your behavior through personalized pricing, credit scoring, and algorithmic visibility until you voluntarily comply with the structural boundaries. You manage yourself. You stay in your lane because stepping out of it results in immediate, invisible, and insurmountable friction.
You are bounded not by walls, but by customized economic and digital realities. It is a managed system where the parameters of your life are silently negotiated between AI models without your consent or even your awareness.
Okay, we need to take a collective deep breath. Because mapping out those 7 phases, from the honeymoon of convenience all the way to algorithmic house arrest, is just overwhelming.
That's a lot to process.
It raises a massive question about the implications for society. If we are all living in these bespoke, algorithmically managed realities, what happens to our shared understanding of the world?
The framework categorizes this as the information and perception fallout, and it points directly to the fragmentation of shared reality.
Right.
Historically, human civilization relies on a baseline of shared facts to function. You can look at the era of broadcast television. There were 3 main networks. Everyone watched the same evening news.
And they might fiercely disagree on the policy response to the news, but the underlying events were a shared reality.
Exactly. We agreed that the bridge collapsed. We just argued about whether to raise taxes to fix it.
Right.
Today, because of the algorithmic influence mechanisms we discussed, 2 people can live next door to each other and inhabit entirely distinct cognitive universes.
Wow.
The algorithm feeds person A a stream of information confirming that crime is skyrocketing and the economy is in ruins. It feeds person B a stream confirming that crime is at historic lows and the economy is booming.
And they both have endless data points, videos, and articles to prove they are right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a profound danger here, as the objective One Other document notes, is that this leads to reduced transparency in decision-making processes.
Because we can't even agree on what's happening.
Right. If we cannot agree on basic reality, we cannot collectively hold institutions accountable. We can't identify corruption or structural abuse because half the population is being actively prevented from seeing it by their algorithmic filters, or they are being told it's a conspiracy by the other half.
The mechanisms of power retreat into the black box of algorithmic curation.
Exactly.
Which fundamentally breaks democracy. I mean, if our reality is fragmented and our visibility is controlled, what happens to voting?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because voting is the ultimate bedrock tool the public have to exert leverage over massive structures of power. It's how we participate in the design of the system. Can you vote your way out of a soft constraint?
The paper addresses this very tension under governance and autonomy. It warns of a fundamental shift from participatory governance toward managed system.
Participatory governance, meaning?
Meaning it requires an informed public that has a voice, a shared reality to debate, and the collective leverage to enforce their will on the ruling class.
But in Phase 7, that leverage is gone.
It vanishes inside the scale of the technological structures. The text notes that practical freedom is redefined. You might still have the ritual of democracy. You might still go to a polling place and cast a ballot.
But does it matter?
Well, if the entire information environment leading up to that vote was perfectly curated by an oligopoly to shape your desires, stoke your fears, and direct your behavior,
Yeah.
and if the economic structure is so consolidated that whichever candidate wins still has to bend the knee to the data monopolies just to keep the digital infrastructure running, then the substantive power of that vote is deeply compromised.
You are a managed population
Right.
participating in a simulation of governance.
Yes, that's exactly it.
That is a staggering conclusion. If the public's perception is entirely downstream of the algorithm, then whoever controls the weights and biases of the algorithm effectively controls the sovereign will of the nation. It's like a bloodless coup by data scientists.
It is a sobering thought.
Okay, I need to pivot aggressively here.
Let's pivot.
Because if we end the deep dive on that note, Our listeners are going to throw their phones into the ocean and go live in a cave. And that is not the purpose of this document.
No, not at all.
The Objective One Theory framework does not present this trajectory as a prophecy. It is a diagnostic tool. And crucially, it outlines the countervailing forces, the resistance, the things that can introduce fiction and break the machine before it hardens.
Yes, the scenario explicitly states that this progression is not inevitable. There are massive historical and technological forces that can interrupt this trajectory. The first major force the text identifies is regulatory intervention and antitrust enforcement.
But wait, earlier we talked about policy capture. We said the monopolies write the rules. How do we get regulatory intervention if the regulators are captured?
Because policy capture is never absolute, and history is cyclical. We have historical precedents for breaking these kinds of structures.
Okay, like what?
Look at the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the American Gilded Age.
Mm.
We saw terrifying, unprecedented economic concentration in industries like oil, steel, and railroads. Standard Oil controlled nearly 90% of the refining capacity. The railroad monopolies controlled the physical routing of all commerce. Their political power seemed absolute. They literally bought state legislatures.
It felt like Phase 6 stratification back then, too.
It did. But they were ultimately broken up. The Sherman Antitrust Act was deployed. Standard Oil was shattered into 34 distinct companies.
Wow.
The government intervened, spurred by overwhelming public demand, investigative journalism, and a cultural rejection of concentrated power. The framework suggests that modern antitrust action is a vital countervailing force today.
But how do you apply 19th century antitrust law to 21st century data monopolies? I mean, traditional antitrust law, especially in recent decades, is heavily focused on the consumer welfare standard.
Yes, the price.
That usually means price. If a monopoly lowers prices for the consumer, the courts often say it's fine. Amazon and Google provide immense value at incredibly low costs, often free.
Yeah.
How do you break up a company whose product is free?
That is the defining legal battle of our era. The regulatory framework has to evolve. We have to shift the definition of monopoly harm from just looking at consumer prices to looking at structural dominance, data hoarding, and the suppression of innovation.
Right, look at the underlying mechanics.
We have to treat foundational digital infrastructure, like cloud computing servers and dominant search algorithms, the way we treated the railroads. They must be regulated as common carriers. They cannot be allowed to favor their own products or politically discriminate on their networks.
And force them to make their data interoperable.
Yes.
If I leave a massive social network, I should be able to take my entire social graph with me to a competitor, the same way I can port my phone number to a new carrier. That drastically lowers the switching costs we talked about in Phase 2.
Exactly. And that leads to the second major countervailing force, technological decentralization. If the core engine of Objective 1.0 is that a few centralized entities own all the AI models and all the data, the antidote is building robust open-source alternatives.
We are actually seeing this right now, aren't we? The open source AI movement.
It is arguably the most important technological battleground on the planet. Massive communities of independent developers, researchers, and even some strategic corporate actors are building frontier-level AI models and releasing the weights, the code, to the public for free.
Wow.
If anyone can download a highly capable LLM and run it locally on their own hardware without sending all their personal data back to a centralized server, it breaks the data flywheel.
It decentralizes the cognitive capital. It's like the digital equivalent of teaching everyone how to build their own printing press.
Yes, exactly. It prevents the technological centralization from solidifying. But both of those things, regulatory intervention and open source development, ultimately rely on the third and most important countervailing force mentioned in the framework,
Which is?
the human element. The text specifically cites cultural and political resistance and public demand for privacy and transparency.
Right, because none of the legal or technological solutions matter without the political will to enact them.
Precisely. If the public remains distracted by the algorithmic spin, if they continue to prioritize frictionless convenience over structural autonomy, the regulatory intervention will never happen.
This is where we come back to voting, but voting with awareness. The public has to demand representatives who actually understand what an API is, who understand how network effects create monopolies.
Yes.
We have to demand privacy laws that don't just ask us to click accept on a cookie banner, but actually ban the predatory extraction of behavioral surplus.
And this highlights the ultimate purpose of the Objective 1.0 document itself. The very act of analyzing this framework, of having this conversation, of you, the listener, understanding these invisible mechanisms, this is the cultural resistance. You cannot fight a system you cannot perceive.
Yes. If you don't know that the algorithm is deliberately optimizing for your anger to generate ad revenue, you just genuinely believe the world is getting angrier and more hostile. But the moment you see the architecture, the spell breaks. When you understand that the friction you feel in your small business isn't a personal failure, but a mathematically designed compression by a centralized monopoly, you stop blaming your neighbor and you start looking at the structure.
The framework reminds us that human systems evolve into these cages only when efficiency, scale, and control are prioritized, without sufficient balance from transparency, accountability, and distributed participation. The goal is to consciously, deliberately reintroduce that balance.
Okay, we have covered an immense, incredible amount of ground today. Let's synthesize what we've unpacked from the Objective 1000 deep dive.
Sounds good.
We started by exploring how a dystopia doesn't need a dictator. It just needs the rational, everyday pursuit of efficiency and profit,
Yeah.
supercharged by massive neural networks and the endless accumulation of our behavioral data.
We examine the mathematical reality of why these monopolies are so hard to disrupt, and how they use algorithmic influence to subtly map our psychological vulnerabilities, keeping us distracted and divided while the economic compression squeezes the middle class.
We tracked the chilling 7-phase progression from the subsidized honeymoon of next-day delivery and free apps through the painful squeeze of wage stagnation and algorithmic spin, all the way to the hardening concrete of a stratified society.
Right.
And we lingered on the terrifying endgame of Phase 7 soft constraint, a world where you have every legal freedom on paper, but an invisible algorithmic vacuum ensures your voice is never heard and your economic choices are entirely bounded.
But crucially, we highlighted the escape hatches. We analyzed how aggressive, modernized antitrust enforcement, the proliferation of decentralized open source technology, and a massive cultural awakening can shatter the data flywheel and reassert human autonomy over the machine. Objective 1Z is a lens. Moving forward, when you read about a new tech merger, a new data-scraping smart device, or a shift in social media algorithms, you now have the structural framework to understand exactly what is happening behind the curtain.
It really changes how you look at every screen in your house. We started this deep dive by noting that the architecture of the future is largely invisible while it's being built. There is no master blueprint stamped evil plan.
No.
Instead, the blueprint is written in the terms of service agreements we blindly scroll past. It's built on the frictionless ease of auto-playing videos, hyper-targeted ads, and voice assistants that listen to us make dinner. The architecture of our constraint is being constructed through our daily rational compliance.
Exactly.
So I want to leave you, our listener, with a final, lingering thought to mull over as you go about your day. It's something that builds on this entire exploration of our technological reality.
Let's hear it.
If our practical freedom is increasingly defined, not by the laws passed by our elected governments, but by the opaque algorithms and user agreements of the platforms we depend on to communicate, work, and exist, at what exact point does our demand for digital convenience become active, knowing complicity in our own stratification?
It's a heavy question.
It is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay critically aware, and we will catch you next time.